This is all about Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things questions and markets related to Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B for the network, a collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation, all Bitcoin, all the time. I'm your host, Christine Lee, checking in for a live look at Bitcoin. The CoinDesk Bitcoin price XVX index is currently trading at $32,430. Bitcoin is slightly down about 1.7% over the past 24 hours. The most reliable reference prices for institutions since 2014 are now published under the CoinDesk brand, trusted globally as the leader in crypto news, events, and data. The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app. The U.S. Consumer Price Index rose faster than expected in June, jumping by 5.4% in the last 12 months, exceeding economists' expectations by about 0.5%. Liz Ann Saunders, chief investment strategist at Charles Schwab, tweeting out this chart and saying, interesting that as CPI inflation has climbed from about 1.4% year over year in January to 5.4% in June, Bitcoin has essentially been cut in half. With a disclaimer, she writes, the past performance is no guarantee of future results. This chart is from Bloomberg data. The CPI report is particularly important for some cryptocurrency investors who view Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation and currency debasement based on Bitcoin's strictly limited supply. So why is Bitcoin falling, you ask? CoinDesk's Brad Cowan notes that the inflation bet may have been priced in months ago as Bitcoin moved from 10,000 to 30,000. CoinDesk's David Morris further notes that several institutions are in lockstep with Fed Chair Jerome Powell's prediction that this wave of inflation is transitory. Recent data shows Bitcoin is tracking higher bond yields, and those should rise sharply if and when the broader market changes its mind about Jerome Powell's predictions. All right, taking a look at our top stories. Grayscale Investments signaling its intent to turn its Bitcoin fund, GBTC, into an exchange-traded fund Tuesday upon announcing that the crypto asset manager has tapped BNY Mellon for a series of key back-end roles. The world's largest custodian bank will begin handling accounting and administrative services for GBTC starting in October. That relationship will eventually morph into transfer agent and ETF services provider for a converted GBTC ETF in the future. Note to viewers, Grayscale is the sister company to CoinDesk under parent company Digital Currency Group. Meanwhile, S&P Dow Jones Indices is rolling out 5 new crypto index products, including a broad digital market index that includes over 240 coins. In May, S&P Dow Jones launched indices focused on Bitcoin, Ether, and a combination of the two. And finally, Bit Mining, a Chinese Bitcoin miner listed on the New York Stock Exchange, raising $50 million to build new overseas data centers following the Chinese crackdown on the industry. The company has started to relocate machines to Kazakhstan. Meanwhile, Nasdaq listed Shanghai-based The Nine is looking to rent space from Russia's BitRiver. And finally, it's not just the Chinese mining industry that's changing. Quebecois crypto miner Bitfarms is looking to expand beyond the Canadian province. And joining us now to discuss the mining industry and more from Rochester, New York is Kevin Zhang, VP of Business Development at mining firm Foundry Digital, which happens to be a sister company to CoinDesk under parent company Digital Currency Group. Great to have you on the show, Kevin. I've been really looking forward to this because your Twitter feed is a great window into the inner workings of the crypto mining industry, especially in the ground in China. Now, China is cracking down on Bitcoin trading and mining activity. And what's fascinating is that this is not the first time China has cracked down on crypto. And despite bans that they repeat every couple of years or so, the Chinese crypto industry has managed to thrive. So can you walk us through a brief summary of the Chinese Bitcoin mining industry, its power, its breadth, to its status today? Because it has undergone some dramatic changes over the past few months.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Kristen. So like you alluded to, China's been a large part of the Bitcoin mining ecosystem for quite some time now. Majority of the ASICs are manufactured there and produced there, and much of the vertical stack with not only the mining manufacturing, but also the mining pools and the data centers are all located in China. So you mentioned before in the past when China had previously cracked down on crypto, the last time that they really just took a very hard stance on it was 2017, towards the end of that year during the ICO boom and bust cycle. And during that period, they had cracked down really hard on the exchanges. And there was a lot of gray area, ambiguity around whether they're going to ban mining or not. So towards that time, that was the first inkling that China was going to take a hard look at mining, but nothing really came to pass coming when that cycle ended. What got really interesting this time around was around March earlier this year, China took a hard stance in Inner Mongolia. They announced they were going to suspend mining activities in that region specifically. So at that point in time, the miners in the space, they were still confused whether this was a stance that was driven by ESG concerns of reducing carbon emissions, or was this a crackdown on mining specifically? Well, we got a lot more clarity around that towards the end of May and June, when more and more provinces came out with mining bans, suspensions all across China in different provinces, not just in the coal-driven regions. The biggest example is in Sichuan, right, where predominantly it's all hydro-based power during the wet season. They closed mining in that region as well. So seeing that come offline, we also saw a major drop in hash rate.
Mm-hmm. So I found this interesting that some miners actually took a gamble and decided not to leave China, which they are paying dearly for because the Chinese government actually padlocked their facilities. Can you go into a little bit of that? Because again, China has issued many warnings and bans on crypto. So,
Absolutely.
And yet the industry has thrived.
Yeah, so it's almost a meme up until recently, right? That we've reached the top. China bans Bitcoin again, or China kills Bitcoin, this or that. So there really was some doubt in a lot of miners' minds that, okay, are they really going to crack down on these mining facilities? So some people took the risk and the gamble that, okay, if I have great relationships with my local power providers and my facilities, I got all the previous permits I needed. Maybe I could continue mining. And during the deadlines that were given, or when the deadlines arrived at the end of April, Inner Mongolia, the bans were in place. And people that still had their facilities operational running, they had padlocks on their transformers and their substations. They couldn't even access their machines. It was all taped off by the police.
And do we know what will happen to all this machinery?
Yeah, so there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of rumors and tinfoil hats, conspiracy theorists that kind of float around on Twitter and such. But the reality is most of the stuff that does get seized just sits in custody with the police, right? It's not like the police departments then take the same units and plug them back online because, once again, Bitcoin mining requires a tremendous amount of electricity and power.
So that leads into another question, which many people have on their minds, is whether or not this ban is just temporary and that there could be a resumption of Bitcoin mining in China in the future.
There definitely is a potential for that, but I think it all comes down to where the fervor and where the attention towards Bitcoin is, right? So China has so many initiatives that counteract with Bitcoin mining, right? For one, they have their environmental initiatives where they're trying to reduce carbon emissions. Then they have their regulatory controls around financial risk and stability. And with Bitcoin and with cryptocurrencies, that undermines a lot of their capital flight controls and the regulations there. And then ultimately, they have what they're debuting as their digital currency, the digital yuan. So the CBDC that they're trying to issue there is also kind of contrary to the Bitcoin mining initiatives. So the most recent crackdowns are the hardest we've ever seen, to the point where we've actually seen some facilities have to uproot not only their machines, but also the electrical equipment. But once again, the point I was trying to make is if Bitcoin mining is no longer in the news, it's no longer in the headlines, and if it kind of goes back under the radar and we're in another bear cycle, then maybe it kind of goes ignored and it doesn't have as much attention.
Interesting. And why did they decide to do this crackdown now? And the timing, I've seen you say that it may have something to do with the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, or the Communist Party of China.
Yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with that, right? Authoritarian government, much of their power and their control comes from can they have a firm grasp on social stability, right? So whether it's their initiatives for environmental reasons, financial risk and controls, or even their own initiatives for the digital yuan, those are all things that Bitcoin, a decentralized ecosystem and a network, kind of undermines.
Okay, so Now we understand the government is serious. We have some video clips that you've posted from Twitter. Now, several Chinese miners, they're leaving. Chinese Bitcoin miners are desperately seeking out new locations in response to the government crackdown. Kazakhstan, Texas are two popular options, according to Bloomberg. Where according to your sources, where are people going?
Yeah, that's a great question. So people are going wherever they can find open capacity. The problem is open capacity is very limited for Bitcoin miners. Prior to these crackdowns, mining production was already ramping up, and facilities were oversubscribed even before all these Chinese miners got displaced. So Chinese miners are relocating to regions where they can find power readily available or can be quickly built. So they're looking at regions like Central Asia. You touched on earlier that they're migrating to areas like Kazakhstan or even Russia. And for those who are thinking longer term, then they're also looking at North America. The issue with North America is it takes a long time. The lead times are very long to build a site and to get it off the ground. There's permitting and regulations that takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and the actual building process and sourcing all the equipment takes 6 to 12 months. So for the people that are very short-term focused and want to get online quicker, they're looking towards Central Asia and Eastern Europe.
That brings to mind the mayor of Miami. He's saying, people should come to Florida. He wants Miami to be a crypto hub, but it's not so straightforward as that in buying equipment. And there's no fire sale of this Chinese equipment, I understand, right? Because it doesn't fit the regulations of other countries.
So I think the equipment, like the electrical equipment, doesn't fit the regulations of other countries, but the ASIC miners themselves can be plugged in universally at different locations. Now, where it gets tricky with mining in previously untapped markets, like a Florida, Miami, or even South America, is the climates are typically hotter or they're more humid. And when mining is typically done with air-cooled solutions, the miners aren't designed to thrive or to run in those conditions. So I think we're going to see a lot of development towards newer technologies that empowers these different regions to be unlocked, right? So I'm alluding to immersion technology, where miners can no longer need to be ran in air-cooled environments. They're actually submerged in dielectric fluids and liquids that cool the units.
Mm-hmm. On Twitter, you also mentioned about the sentiment in the Chinese Bitcoin mining community. Perhaps you could talk a bit about that. One tweet that caught my attention was people were just too sad to even drink.
Yeah, so we talked about it before, right? Like leading up to the crackdowns, the main holdout in the big province that everyone's looking to was Sichuan. Was Sichuan actually going to have mining banned? And it had all the properties of a region that makes sense to be a mining hub for the world, right? It's predominantly hydropower, and it's all stranded energy that would otherwise be wasted. So a lot of people were holding out hope that Sichuan will remain online, especially during the wet season. Unfortunately, when those crackdowns happened, essentially all the mining hopes of China were dashed with that region. So you can imagine how devastating it was for everyone that had put in years of effort and capex and investments into these mining facilities.
Kevin, do you think that the Chinese crypto industry will still try to find a way to thrive? It has managed to thrive all these years despite these bans, but do you think it could come back from this?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's so much talent and innovation and expertise that's still in China as well. And we talked about before that a lot of the mining is still, or most of the mining manufacturing is still produced over in China. So I think we're going to shift from more of, instead of them building facilities locally in that region, a lot of that talent's going to disperse abroad to build facilities elsewhere. But also I think the technologies they're going to be working on will evolve as well. I talked about the open air-cooled miners, the traditional shoebox form of these machines, where they have fans on both intake and outtake. These designs will probably shift in the future as they are going to disperse miners to other regions of the world where they require different form factors and different types of cooling.
That's interesting. So the Chinese government doesn't have a problem with the manufacturing of the equipment and such, but just the operation of the mines and the power that is being consumed in the country. And I wonder if China's carbon neutrality policy did play a role in all this when all is said and done.
Yeah, I think it had maybe some role in some piece of the reasoning, their prioritization. But end of the day, they still banned Sichuan, which is largely hydropower, right? So I think it's a perfect confluence of all these different priorities that the CCP and the Chinese government has, right? With not only the environmental targets, but with the financial controls and ultimately issuing their own digital yuan.
Finally, Kevin, I just want to know what happens now to the Bitcoin network. We saw a huge decline in the hash rate. Some people outside China obviously were very happy about that because they were able to get rewards with less work. But is this good for the Bitcoin network?
Yeah, I think it's good for the Bitcoin network long term, especially in the sense that more hash rate would get distributed and be more decentralized the overall network over time. Previously, regions that were passed up on, especially in the southern hemisphere, where it's hotter or it's more humid, those regions have a lot of cheap power that was previously untapped because the miners are mainly air-cooled. So we're going to see more decentralization there. As far as miners that have their equipment already plugged in, it's a great time to be mining. If you look at the statistics and the economics of mining right now, it's just as profitable to mine now as it was when Bitcoin was at its all-time high of 64,000. I think the future is going to be really, really bright for Bitcoin, especially as we have more and more of these new regions coming online with hash rate in mining facilities.
So who will become the new leader in hash rate in the world? China had 2/3 of the hash rate for several years. Do you see that shifting?
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see that shift, right? When essentially in the last 2 months, you had almost 50% of the network is shut off overnight. The biggest benefactors are, once again, the miners that are already online. And a lot of the migration that has been taking place, moving units over to North America. You have the publicly listed companies and access to capital markets that's really accelerating the growth of the Bitcoin mining infrastructure here in North America. So I think the US is going to be a clear leader for future mining generations to come. One of the big key advantages of mining within North America is you have more stable regulatory frameworks, right? You don't have sudden bans overnight, even when you had all the proper permitting in place.
All right. Kevin, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon and sharing your insights on the whole mining industry.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that was Kevin Zhang, VP of Business Development at Boundary Digital. And that's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christine Lee. Join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in New York for First Mover, your first look at the day's global crypto news headlines. You're watching CoinDesk TV.